Alrighty. This is The Point. I'm Heather Goldstone, sitting in for Mindy Todd. The Rwandan genocide lasted just 100 days, yet Human Rights Watch estimates over 500,000 people were killed. Others say the number could be closer to 1 million. Violence broke out on April 6, 1994. It was the culmination of long-standing ethnic tensions between the minority Tutsi, who had controlled power for centuries, and the majority Hutu, who had come to power in the early 1960s. This wasn't the first time Rwanda had seen such ethnic conflict, but it was the most devastating. Rwanda was left with the highest proportion of orphans of any nation on earth. 20 years later, many of those orphans are trying to find a way to forgive, to heal themselves and their country, and to ensure such genocide does not happen again. Emmanuel Habimana is among those orphans searching for a path forward. He lost his parents and 6 siblings during the genocide. His journey to find forgiveness and healing is the subject of a new documentary, Kimura, To Heal, which he co-produced. Emmanuel Habimana is currently touring the United States, speaking with students here about what he's learned. He visited Harwich High School on Monday and visits Barnstable High School today. Emmanuel Habimana, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Now, Kimura, the name of the documentary that you've produced, means to heal.
Yes.
Do you feel that you have healed, or that it is even possible to heal from something like this?
Well, as always I say, to heal, it's a process. It's a process, and it's really hard to tell that it's one action that it's done and it's over. It's a process, and something that you do and over each and every day of your life until maybe you die. So I don't think in our cases we are already, well, maybe we are fully healed, but some of us are working on that.
You're healing.
Yes.
Now, let's go back to the very beginning of this. Can you explain for us the origins of this conflict, the ethnic differences between Hutu and Tutsi? As I understand, this is not something that necessarily came from the Rwandan people yourselves, but was kind of imposed by the Belgians during the colonial period.
Yeah, first of all, I think the Hutu and Tutsi, and there is another tribe, the third one, called Abatwa, Toa. First of all, they are all Rwandans, and they've been, from what I learned, from what I was told, they lived in the same society for many centuries. I think since Rwanda was created, was a country.
When you were a young child, what were relations like in the town where you lived? Were you raised with a strong identity that you were Tutsi, or was it really more a sense of everyone was Rwandan?
Well, no, by the time I grew up, I think, when I was about 6 years old, 7 years old, I think it's when I started to question about my identity. And especially because in the school, you could hear our classmates calling us, after I think some principals or somebody from institutions of school coming and do counting every Tutsi or Hutus, but that was okay. But after they left, kids start to ask, "Oh, I didn't know that you are Tutsi," but not only just to say you are Tutsi, but I just you're a cockroach, you're a snake. And so I think this is when I started to question about my identity and ask myself, what's wrong did the Tutsi against the Hutus, and didn't make sense to me that time.
I can only imagine when violence started, how bewildering that must have been for a 9-year-old child, that suddenly your neighbors and other members of your community who, you say you were getting this sense by the time you were 6, you were 9 when the genocide happened, that you were getting this sense that there was tension and that you were being looked down upon for your ethnicity, but to actually have members of your community become violent against you and your family must have been absolutely bewildering.
Well, it's really hard to imagine, and I still today I don't still believe that. I mean, I do. I know that's happened, but it's really hard to conceive and to imagine because seeing people, your neighbors coming and take away your family. I mean, as you can understand, it's not something that you can fully describe or talk about. It's really heavy. It's really strange. It's inhuman. It's an inhuman thing that I've never seen in my life.
Can you explain for us or describe for us what happened to your family when the violence started? Your family, you were part of a large family, and you were
That's
split
right.
up into several smaller groups.
That's right. I think my story. I think the story of my family began. I think from what I remember when I was 7 years old and being a part of Tutsi and being born in a village where majority. I think we were few families in my cellar, like a small neighborhood we were staying. We were two families, Tutsi families, um, and so my story began in 1992 when we were forced to leave our home place, actually my native village, and we moved to the city. And so we were forced to, we didn't have, my parents both didn't have pretty much, I mean, they don't have job. We didn't have farm as we used to be. And then we had to struggle moving in different parts of the capital city, Kigali, trying to hide our ethnicity, try to be in a new place that nobody will know us, but most of the people knew us because we had, in any case, to identify ourselves to the local administration, and plus the radio RTLM, Radio Télévision de Mille Collines, which many times was announcing the name of my dad, like telling where we are hiding. I don't know who were giving them the information, and so we end up by being in a Catholic church in Kicukiro, where actually by the end of 1993 we separate ourselves. Of course, we met many Tutsis displaced from different places of Kicukiro, and by the time of genocide, we were like some of my family were in this church, and others were with me in another house, was somewhere close to church.
In case you're just joining us, my guest is Emmanuel Habimana, a survivor of the Rwandan genocide that took place 20 years ago. Emmanuel Habimana, in the end, how many family members did you lose during the genocide?
By the time of genocide, there were 9 kids. 2 of us have been killed before, back in some days before I was born. So by the time of genocide, there were 9 kids. 4 of us have been killed in genocide, plus mom and my dad. And so we survived, 5 of us. I do still have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, which is a miracle for me because most of Tutsi families, they lost the entire families. If it's not an entire family which was completely exterminated, there is 1 or 2 in family. So I think I consider myself as the luckiest among a few families who survived with brother and sisters.
And as we said, you were 9 years old in 1994 when this happened.
Yes, correct.
Without parents, how did you survive? How did you make it through that 100 days of the genocide and through the years that followed as a young child?
Well, I tried everything. I don't know if maybe whatever I did was conscient or not. Sometimes I have to say that it's a miracle that's happened to me because I knew, and well, everybody, me as a kid, I was, saying, I'm telling myself, or maybe thinking, maybe I'm going to be killed, maybe I'm going to survive, and you're asking yourself if you make it to the next day. And I don't know what I did, if it was conscient. I think it happens by miracle. By miracle, that's what I can only say, because there is no other way. I was not mature or enough to make sure or like think twice about the decisions, but I did. Some came spontaneously. I think due to the previous life we lived since 19, I guess since I was 1992, and moving in different places, being part of a family that have been persecuted for years and years. I think that's also made me to be conscient and suspicious about what was going on, and kind of be a mature kid, even though I was too young.
Now, after the genocide, your oldest sister and took you and the rest of your siblings and even other orphans in,
Correct.
and essentially formed a new family. She changed essentially from being your sister to being your mother almost.
That's right.
And then married. And talk about that family that you formed afterward. I mean, you know, this happens occasionally for other families under different circumstances, but this idea of siblings becoming parents has become more common in Rwanda because of the number of orphans that
That's
resulted.
correct. Yeah, some kids, some orphans have to form themselves the groups. As I said, I'm lucky one, because probably I had my sister who survived. She was a young adult. She was about 22 years old, and she had a caring, and she still has a caring heart, and took care of me and kind of play a lot of my parents. And other kids and part of my community, orphans or community, had to raise themselves, or maybe meet without even having a relation, like a family relationship, and form the kind of community that we call the orphans chief of household. So they had to raise themselves, or maybe they were too young, but they tried to make the artificial families. I remember when I was in high school, it's when we started the ARG, which is Student Associations, often of genocide, where we were trying to give ourselves a sense of family, and try to make an artificial family where we group ourselves in groups of 10 or even more or less, and we choose who is going to play a role of being a dad or mom, and in that case we can have like a sense of family and kind of giving each other advices in the schools. So it's been a quite a special experience, but we are glad some of us made it. Some people couldn't, but most of us did it.
Now, in the film, you say you didn't know for many years the full story of what happened to some of your family members.
Correct.
During the genocide. Do you and your family members and your friends, do you talk about the genocide often? Is this something that you feel it's helpful to talk about, or is it something that you try to kind of put aside most of the time?
Well, when it comes to the storytelling, we sometimes depends on the families as well. Some families are open to talk about it, but it's not that easy, as it brings like memories. That's the memories are always there, but it makes you like reflect fully, and drives you in a time when hard time that we had to leave. And so my family and I don't think we often talks about genocide, but occasionally, yeah, we do. And I don't think it's only my family. I think it's every Rwandan, because it's really hard to talk about the present without talking the past. So, but I don't know how to phrase this, but genocide is there. It's always there in our everyday conversations, and want or not, you have to have a reference in or whatever we say, and whatever we do. there is many, I think, connection with the current life and with the life that's lived in a genocide. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not something you can ever fully leave behind. You then did, in the course of making the film, learn, and you asked for I guess, the specific details of what happened to some of your sisters and your mother. Why, almost 20 years later, did you then feel it was necessary for your healing process to learn what had happened to your family?
Well, I think one of the reasons that I wanted to learn, it's due to, I think, my life after the genocide and growing up and having, with other orphans and having all these memories and asking myself why this happened to me, why I don't have my parents, why some people like me don't have families. And I've been always asking all those questions and try to see, does really my life matters? Do I really count as anybody else? Why this happened to us? And when it comes to I felt like I really want to fully understand, just not to understand by myself, but to share the story, which I think is important for the rest of the world. There was other communities back home in Rwanda or in Africa or beyond to know, because it happened in my country, but it's still happening somewhere around the world for different reasons. And that's made me like, okay, this is what happened to me, this is what I lived, this is what my family lived. I don't think people understand the result after month. They don't think how people get affected. And so I think that was the reason I said, maybe once my story gets out there, maybe some people, I don't know if maybe people listen to it, you will have but I believe that it may change people's minds in many different ways.
You're listening to The Point. I'm Heather Goldstone, sitting in for Mindy Todd. I'm talking with Emmanuel Habimana, a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, about the lessons he's learned and now shares with students everywhere. We'll have more after a short break. All right, so I'm going to bring you guys in.
Is my English clear?
Oh,
I feel like
yeah,
I'm
it was
losing
very
my-
good.
Very
Yes.
good.
Yes.
I'm losing my points. But I didn't fully understand the introduction. Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who knew there was so much math that goes into running a
Yeah,
radio
have
show?
to make sure it's exactly 48 minutes and 45 seconds in the end. So,
That's true.
and when we do it from 9 to 10 o'clock, I have my I
Yeah.
know when we have to end, so I have my countdown there. But
Yeah.
does that look
Yeah, it makes sense.
accurate?
Yeah.
Okay?
I think it gives back more ideas to the people outside of the yeah, it's accurate, yeah.
All right. You're listening to The Point. I'm Heather Goldstone, sitting in for Mindy Todd. I'm talking with Emmanuel Habimana, a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan genocide. He's both the subject and co-producer of a new documentary about Rwandan orphans called Komora, To Heal, and he's speaking at 2 Cape Cod high schools this week. Also joining us now is John Dickson, a teacher at Harwich High School and sponsor of the Student Anti-Genocide Coalition STAND. Also MacKenzie Hamilton. She's a 2009 graduate of Harwich High School and the Northeast Outreach Coordinator for STAND. She's been to Rwanda twice to work on post-genocide issues and is traveling with Emmanuel Habimana on this leg of his tour. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Emmanuel Habimana, we were talking about what happened to your family during the genocide, and of course, from the international perspective, one of the perhaps great tragedies of the genocide was the fact that there were UN peacekeeping troops in Rwanda, and yet this still happened. And it seems from the documentary like there was a lot of misunderstanding about what those peacekeeping troops were there to do, what they could do, and what they were not able to do. And in fact, there were peacekeeping troops who were surrounding an area where your mother and sisters were at one point, and they then left to help expatriates get out of the country, to escape the violence. And in the process of creating the film, you spoke with Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, who was the force commander for those United Nations forces, and you thanked him. And you thanked him for staying to be a witness and for doing all that he could.
Right.
Do you really feel that he did all that he could, that those UN troops did everything that they could?
Yeah, I feel like he did everything he could, because I think making a decision, even though he was ordered by UN Security Council to pull out, I think it's something very important, because many people had to leave, many generals from different countries. But he made a decision because he knew exactly what he was dealing with. And he made the decision at individual level to stay and serve people that he came to protect. Because this time, nobody else could save us, because our own government, the Hutu government, if I become very specific, wanted to exterminate people. Our people, our neighbors, were against us. Our friends, people from our families. So our only hope, I don't think, sometimes I ask myself, did really God wanted to protect us? So, but in eyes of us as survivors, people this time, I think the only hope we wanted is the presence of United Nations, the presence of international communities. Some made it, as General Dallaire and other few peacekeepers who chose to stay at their own risk. So I think something very important to recognize and to be thankful for those people who stayed and tried to save lives of people.
Now, when you spoke to him, he gave you essentially some advice about what he thought needs to happen to heal and rebuild Rwanda. And he largely said, talk to the media, talk to other people, talk to other students.
That's right.
Get your story out there. And
that's right.
I think you were already doing a bit of that. You were already in the process of creating a movie. But clearly you've taken that advice. When you speak particularly to students, say here in the United States, does that help you personally with your healing process?
Well, I think it helps me, because at some point I have to tell you something, because this is, I think, very important. I think I want to emphasize on this. Genocide happened to us and we were abandoned. After the genocide, very big number of people, some on the media field, some on some international organizations, some scholars, and some individuals for different reasons, tried to retell, revise, or deny what happened. And so, me as a survivor, I felt like, no way, this is what happened on the watch of everybody. And yet, there are some people who try to deny or to mistell, I don't know if that's the correct term to use, mistell or misinterpret what happened to us. Try to find out the reason behind everything what happened. And that seems to be like very torturing and touching in my wounds. And I don't know if that is correct, but it was very painful, and I felt like I wanted to have opportunity. And more I grew up, I felt like kind of a responsibility. I know it's really hard. It's really hard to tell what exactly happened to me, what happened to my family, to my country, to my people. It's really hard. But I felt it's my responsibility to share what I lived and how I felt and how I still feel. And it helps me in healing because I feel like the way that I suffered, I don't want anybody to experience the same thing. And mistelling the story, misinterpret the story, I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps to people to learn, because more we oversimplify what happened, more we try to see other reasons behind. I don't think it doesn't help at all. Not only it doesn't help Rwandans themselves, but also it doesn't help the entire world, as we keep seeing the same kind of genocide happening in different countries, in Africa, also beyond. And I think telling the story, it helps because it brings people in reality. This is what I do feel, but reflects to many other millions of people, Rwandans or outside of Rwanda, in Africa or beyond.
We can't learn from our mistakes if we don't fully recognize them.
That's exactly what I want to say.
Now, MacKenzie Hamilton, you are one of many people who, as Emmanuel was just saying, kind of, there were very few members of the international community present in Rwanda during the genocide, but afterward there has been this influx of people and I think a large amount of interest in what happened. How did you first become aware of and interested in what had happened in Rwanda, and what drove you to want to go to Rwanda?
Right, so my experience actually began in high school when I first heard about the Darfur genocide. So that was probably 2004, 2005-ish. So I was maybe a sophomore in high school at the time, and John Dickson, who's here with us, put together a concert to raise awareness about the Darfur genocide. So it was kind of a variety show with some local talent, and in between acts they would recite the figures of the people who had died in Darfur in Western Sudan. And that just shocked me. I'd learned a little bit about the Holocaust in school, and that had always really hit home with me. And I was just, it seemed like ancient history, the Holocaust back in the 40s, and I was born in 1990, so it seemed like ancient history, and so it really hit home that it was happening right now. And I hadn't heard about Rwanda yet, but that's kind of what got me more involved in anti-genocide work. And through that, I met someone who introduced me to the program Global Youth Connect, which brings Americans to Rwanda, brings American students and Rwandan students together to talk about human rights issues in both countries. And so that was my first experience in Rwanda in 2009, right before I attended Smith College, and then I later studied abroad in Rwanda as well in 2011.
Now, I've seen and heard people who have been to Rwanda in the past 20 years say that there is something special and unique about Rwanda that just draws you in. Can you describe at all what that is? What makes Rwanda so special?
I think some of it, at least for me, is the intense physical beauty of the country. And there's just thousands of rolling hills. It's called the Land of 1,000 Hills for a reason. And they're beautiful and green and lush and covered in farms, and it's just amazing when you take a bus outside of the city. And the city itself is this incredibly vibrant, growing, developing city. It's very clean, not really like you think of many African cities. You see people cleaning up trash from the streets, who are being paid by the government, and there are also everyone chips in one day a month in a program called Umuganda. Everyone in the country, is contributing to development in that way. It's amazing, and just how people are rebuilding the country there's nothing like it.
Sounds like there's so much to be proud of.
That's right.
In being a Rwandan today.
Mm-hmm.
How does a country get from genocide 20 years ago to now? There are communities where there are survivors of the genocide and people who took part in the killing living together, working together, everyone in the nation chipping in to rebuild this nation. How do you get to that point?
Well, I think now I'm going to answer that in a personal perspective, like aspect. Well, I think I share this with many Rwandans. So, beside of our difficult background, which led to the violation, I think every Rwandan, including myself, I think our country, everyone, like we it's a special place. I think everybody wants to be there, and it feels like it's, how do you call, like the baby bed,
Like a cradle.
yeah, a cradle of every Rwandan way. You go there and you sleep, you feel comfortable and you feel something. But after the
Can you
genocide,
still feel that? Can you feel that
I
you are
think-
being cradled in a place where you went through such trauma?
I think so too. A part of Rwanda is a place you feel that way because it's our identity. It's one of us. It's our country. It's what makes me to be as Manuel who is speaking today. I think it's part of me. It's in my blood. I just love like this Rwandan value and culture. But when it comes to the genocide again, I don't think it's only in Rwandans, but I think maybe this kind of something that I'm going to say, we share it with many other African people. Being obedient on authorities. I think what happened, it's true that there were hatred, there were division, ethnic divisions, but also intensified by a group of political leaders who actually were calling, using media, using newspapers, using propagandas and stuff, and capture people and make them like the Tutsi are your enemies, and then you have to exterminate. And I'm happy to see today, like everybody from both Hutu and Tutsis who are being part of the government, they are trying everything possible to tell people this is again your homeland, this is your country, this is your identity, and try to bring back people in United Nations, in United Rwanda, that they have to feel it's okay to be different in your ethnic groups or whatever, but you have to remember that you all part of this country that we all call our beauty, our country, our identity. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think that's why made it to be possible to have some people who killed and then released from jail, come back in their communities and ask forgiveness and stay side by side by the people that they victimized. And these people that they victimized, and to be again forgiving and tolerant and understanding, and to accept these people to come back in their communities. And now they're part, like the Rwandan progress today. But it's really, really difficult first. It's a process again. We have always to walk and walk and walk and walk. Since it reaches the point that I think every Rwanda wants to be.
You're listening to The Point. I'm Heather Goldstone, sitting in for Mindy Todd. My guests are Emmanuel Habimana, a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, MacKenzie Hamilton, Northeast Outreach Coordinator for the Student Anti-Genocide Coalition, STAND, and John Dickson, a teacher at Harwich High School and a STAND sponsor. Our conversation continues after a short break. Go ahead and let it out.
I was going to say, now's a good time to sneeze.
Let it
Bless
out.
you.
It's actually cold in here.
Yeah.
It is,
Keeps everyone awake.
That's true.
There's that, I suppose.
So you have one segment left.
Yep. I'm going to bring you right in at the beginning.
Excuse me.
This is The Point. I'm Heather Goldstone, sitting in for Mindy Todd. I'm talking with Emmanuel Habimana, a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan genocide. He's both the subject and co-producer of a new documentary about Rwandan orphans called Camorra, To Heal. Also with us, MacKenzie Hamilton, Northeast Outreach Coordinator for the Student Anti-Genocide Coalition, STAND, and John Dickson, a teacher at Harwich High School and a STAND sponsor. Now, John Dickson, this is not the first time that you have brought someone intimately associated in some way with a genocide event to the high school to speak with students. We heard MacKenzie saying that that's part of how she got involved in this. Why do you think that it is so important for high school students here on Cape Cod to hear about these events and to hear these very first person, very very emotional storytelling of these events?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that for any student growing up anywhere, there's the struggle to expand your horizons beyond your immediate experience. And it's easy in anyone's life to live their life and the life of their community and not be aware of what happens in the world beyond it. So as a teacher, it's always our effort to expand their view, to give them a sense of what happens beyond their day-to-day life, and to bring people in from other countries, from other experiences, who've traveled, helps them begin to appreciate the vast expanse of humanity that's out there, and also the commonalities that exist with people. I mean, the students, we had Emmanuel in class yesterday, and for him to be able to come in and share his story, for the students, it was so moving for them. They had such a great experience, and that changes the way that kids think. And a student like MacKenzie, all those years ago, was one of our great all-stars of our school. That helped change, give her a sense and help put her on her path that she's still walking today of looking at the world from a different perspective, and to then go about and actually try and make that world a better place and try and struggle against the forces that create genocides around the world.
How do students, for the most part, respond to this? I mean, you say that they greet it very positively. It's not a traumatic experience for them. You find that this is really a positive experience for the students?
Yeah, it certainly is traumatic. It's traumatic to have to think about people being killed, for Emmanuel to share his story, or other people to share their stories, and for students to imagine themselves and their family being split up, being sent on the run, and having members killed in different circumstances. It's certainly traumatic, but I think students really appreciate that the authenticity of the experience, and the authenticity of what bringing people from the outside in, and just giving them something different from what they usually get by reading textbooks and listening to teachers like me.
Now, Emmanuel, as I understand it, you were talking about kind of how the Rwandan government is telling people in Rwanda at this point to essentially relate to each other. And as I understand it, the government has tried to kind of say that you shouldn't talk about ethnicity, or that kind of shouldn't be part of the conversation. But how do you then talk about the history of your family and your country? And is it possible to ignore or omit ethnicity from your conversations?
Well, this is kind of, I've heard that when it comes to like how it sounds outside, it's controversial. But I think everybody has a right to call himself a Hutu or Tutsi. I think what is forbidden is to use it as when you intend to hurt someone else. Like, there is nothing bad to be a Tutsi, or nothing bad to be a Hutu. I think this is the way that it should be. But also because people don't use it in a correct term, especially when they want to hurt others, and calling names after this ethnical, because ethnics is there. Hutu and Tutsis, it's a reality. It's not a myth. It's something they exist. But I think when you use it in hurting other people, calling the names after calling Hutu a Tutsi, a cockroach, a snake, I think that's what it's most illegal, if I may say, maybe forbidden and strictly forbidden in calling those names. But also we've seen how it produced something really negative, and the intention of the government. I think I'm not a government and part of government, but I can speak as a citizen. Is to give a chance to the next generation. Maybe they'll live in a place where nobody would identify himself or herself as a Tutsi or Hutu. It's really hard. It's almost impossible, but it's working.
Now, John Dickson, the American history is full of events and tensions based around race and ethnicity, and we still struggle with that in this country. Are there lessons that your students can and do derive about how to treat one another here in the United States, not necessarily about going to Africa to help prevent genocide there, but simply lessons that students can take from talking with people like Emmanuel about how to deal with race relations in the United States today?
I think absolutely the best way to overcome prejudice is to be exposed, to become familiar with the people who you might otherwise have prejudices about. And so if you just hear about people from a certain place and people tell you something, you don't have something in your experience to counteract that. But when you meet someone and you get to talk to someone, you hear stories and you become friends with someone, then that overcomes that separation that allows prejudices to exist. So it's really the air that kind of helps disinfect the dangers of hatred, of discrimination, and in its worst form, of genocide. And certainly in this country, be it around issues with Native Americans, with African Americans, with Latinos, these are to help expose students so that they get to know people of different groups, is really the best tool we have of counteracting prejudice and discrimination in the future.
Are those parallels and lessons that you try to explicitly draw out with your students after a visit like this? Absolutely.
It's to have Emmanuel come and speak to our students means so much to them that they're important enough that someone who's on a national tour to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the genocide would come speak to them. And that means so much to them, and they were so wrapped up in his presentation that afterward, absolutely, there's more questions, there's more discussions. What can we do? What's happening in Sudan or in Congo, which we talk about in our stand group, and then how do we take action, and how can we become the kind of citizens that help prevent the next genocide from happening?
Now, Emmanuel, a key part of this that you've talked about a little bit is the capacity to forgive. And you talked about essentially an incredible amount of empathy for the people who took part in the killings, understanding what it was, the fear and the misinformation that drove them to this point. That to me seems a remarkable capability. And in your documentary, Komora, this seems to be something that's very widespread among the orphans and the survivors of the genocide, this incredible capacity to forgive. Where does that come from?
Well, I think I answered this in a kind of from what I talk to people. It's as I said, forgiving is a process. It doesn't happen and takes a while. And some people were able to forgive. Some people they don't